Yo, wealth explorers, get your smelling salts ready because today we're talking about a man so disgustingly rich that he makes modern billionaires look like they're running a GoFundMe for their own lunch. Yeah, I know. It's 2026 and Elon Musk is sitting on $852 billion. He's basically the main character of the internet. But meet Jacob Fugger. This 16th century absolute unit had an adjusted net worth of $400 billion. Now, I see you typing in the comments already. Knox, that's only half an Elon. But listen to the math, you beautiful nerds. Elon lives in a world of high-speed fiber optics, global stock markets, and government bailouts. Jacob Fugger pulled this off in a world where fast transport meant a horse that didn't have a heart attack, and the cloud was just something that rained on your plague-infested village. He controlled 2% of the entire gross domestic product of Europe. To match that kind of market dominance today, Elon would need to be worth over $2 trillion. Jacob didn't just buy a social media platform to post memes. He bought the emperor and the pope to act as his personal bodyguards. He treated the Holy Roman Empire like a deadbeat roommate who owed him rent, and he was about to change the locks. Today, we're looking at how a family of weavers became the invisible kings of the world. Mind blown yet? Let's roll. Rewind to the late 1300s. The Fuggers didn't start with silver spoons. They started with lint. Hans Fugger rolls into Augsburg, Germany, and starts trading fustian, a fancy cotton wool blend that everyone was obsessed with. This was the 14th century, guys. People were so bored that new fabric was the equivalent of a new iPhone launch. If you had a slightly softer shirt than your neighbor, you were basically royalty. Smart, right? But the Fuggers weren't playing small ball. They didn't just want to make the shirts. They wanted to own the sheep, the loom, and the guy selling the thread. They married into the right guilds. They networked like absolute monsters. And by the 1400s, they were rubbing elbows with the Habsburgs, the royal influencers of the day. But every family has that one kid who is just different. Jacob was the 10th kid. 10th! In the 1400s, being the 10th kid is like being the backup quarterback for a team that doesn't even have a ball. You aren't just a spare, you're the spare's spare. In a world where the oldest son gets everything, being number 10 means your inheritance is basically a good luck and a pat on the back. His parents basically looked at him and said, "Jacob, you're never inheriting the business. Go talk to God." But Jacob had a nose for profit that could smell a gold coin buried under a mountain. He ditched the monastery for Venice, the 15th century equivalent of a cocaine-fueled Wall Street trading floor. Venice was the center of the world, full of shady deals, spice monopolies, and sailors who hadn't seen a vegetable in 3 years. While everyone else was partying, Jacob was learning double-entry bookkeeping, which at the time was basically dark magic. It was the original matrix code. It allowed him to track exactly how much people owed him, down to the last drop of their dignity. He realized that while God was great for the soul, compound interest was much better for the kitchen. He went back to Germany and found his first victim, Archduke Sigismund of Tyrol. Now, let's talk about Renaissance royalty for a second. These guys were royal broke. They had massive titles, giant hats, and zero liquidity. They were like that friend who forgets his wallet every time you go to Chipotle, except their burrito was a massive war with France that they couldn't afford. The Archduke needed 150,000 guldens to pay for his lifestyle. Jacob handed over the cash, but he was a different kind of shark. He didn't want a standard interest rate because the church said interest was a sin. Instead, he wanted the exclusive mining rights to the silver and copper mines in the region. The Archduke defaulted, obviously, because managing money wasn't exactly a royal priority. And just like that, Jacob snagged mines worth billions. He didn't just take the money, he took the machine that made the money. This guy basically turned his royal competitors into his personal speed bumps, roadkill for the rich. At their peak, the Fuggers weren't just part of the economy, they were the economy. They controlled 80% of Europe's copper production. Think about that for a second. If you were a king and you wanted to make cannons to blow up your neighbor, you had to call Jacob. If you didn't pay your bill on time, Jacob stops the shipment, your neighbor wins the war, you lose your head. He was a monopoly on steroids. He even created the first international news service, a network of spies and messengers feeding him market info before anyone else. He had Bloomberg terminals made of horse messengers. He knew a war was starting in Italy before the local king even had his boots on, and he'd hike the prices accordingly. That isn't just business, that is predatory genius. But the ultimate flex? The election of 1519. The Holy Roman Emperor died, and it was a paid-win auction for the throne. It was King Francis of France versus King Charles of Spain. This wasn't about who was the better leader, it was about who had the biggest bag of bribe money. Jacob dropped 850,000 guldens in bribes to make sure Charles won. You want to know what that is today? It's roughly $170 billion. $170 billion on a single bribe. Imagine writing a check for the entire value of Amazon's shipping fleet just to say, congrats on the new job, to a guy you basically own. Charles won and became Charles V, the most powerful man on earth. But a few years later, when Charles started acting like he was actually in charge, Jacob wrote him a letter that is legendary in the world of toxic business. He basically told the most powerful man on the planet, hey, remember that time I bought you a continent? Yeah, the invoice is due. Pay up or I'll find a new emperor who listens better. XOXO, Jacob. He didn't just have money, he had the kind of audacity that makes modern CEOs look like shy interns. You thought it was all smooth sailing? Let's look at the twists. The alchemy gaslight. Jacob used rumors that he knew alchemy to scare off his rivals. He let people believe he could literally turn lead into gold, but really he was just way better at metallurgy and lying. He was gaslighting the entire banking industry into thinking he had magic powers, while he was just using basic math and a ruthless legal team.
Everyone always talks about the Medicis, but the Fuggers outlasted them and out-earned them by a landslide. Why? Because Jacob was a shark that never slept. When his Hungarian miners revolted over brutal conditions in 1515, he didn't call HR for a sensitivity seminar. He didn't offer them a pizza party to boost morale. He called the emperor's army, crushed the riot with iron and fire, and then pivoted to mercury mines in Spain. Problem solved, profits doubled. It's like modern CEOs outsourcing complaints to HR hell, but with more pikes and fewer emails. The Vatican visa. Back then, lending with interest was a sin called usury. If you did it, the church said you were going straight to hell. But Jacob wanted to get into heaven, and he definitely didn't want to stop charging interest. So, what do you do when you're the richest man in the world? You buy a patch for the Bible. He donated roughly $15 billion adjusted to Pope Leo X to convince him that profit was just risk compensation. He literally bought a DLC for the Bible that made his business legal in the eyes of God. The dark side? He bankrolled the indulgences, those get-out-of-purgatory cards that made Martin Luther so mad he started the Reformation. Fugger was the middleman. He pocketed a processing fee for every soul trying to buy its way out of hell. If a peasant paid $500 to keep their grandma's soul from burning, Jacob was pocketing a $50 processing fee. He was the visa of the Vatican. Martin Luther was nailing his 95 theses to the church door, while Jacob was nailing 95% profit margins. Reformation? More like profit formation. He made money off the church and then made money off the people leaving the church. He was the ultimate double agent of finance. The Fuggers didn't just make money, they invented the world we live in. They invented futures contracts, predicting metal prices like 16th century Wall Street quants. They funded the age of exploration. Every time a Columbus knockoff set sail to find a new world, a Fugger ledger was tracking the return on investment. If there was a colony being settled, Jacob probably owned the dirt they were standing on. But his weirdest legacy? The Fuggerai in Augsburg. Built in 1516, it's the world's oldest social housing project. It is a beautiful walled village. And the rent? It hasn't changed in 500 years. It's still under €1 a year. Still. But here's the smart greed catch. To live there, you have to be Catholic and you have to pray for Jacob Fugger's soul 3 times a day. This man was so terrified of the usury equals hell thing that he basically hired a perpetual army of poor people to act as a human distributed denial of service attack on God's voicemail. Every day for 5 centuries, thousands of prayers have been hitting the servers of heaven saying, "Hey God, Jacob's a good guy. Don't look at the interest rates, look at the nice houses he built." He turned his guilt into a real estate tax haven for the soul. 500 years later, the fire insurance is still active. Most landlords take your security deposit. Jacob took your spiritual output. That is a flex that Jeff Bezos hasn't even dreamed of yet. All right, Wealth Explorers, before we bounce, the big what if. What if Jacob Fugger had been a nice guy who just stayed a weaver and listened to his priest? If Jacob doesn't drop that $170 billion bribe, Charles V never becomes emperor. Spain doesn't get the funding to colonize half the world. The Reformation might have been crushed early or never happened at all. Our entire modern reality, the borders on the map, the way we use money, the very concept of a central bank, was bankrolled by a grumpy German guy who was absolutely terrified of going to hell. Jacob Fugger proves one thing. You don't need a computer or a rocket ship to change the world. You just need a ledger, a monopoly on copper, and enough cash to tell the Pope to change his mind. Loved this dive into Fugger fortune madness? Hit that like button, subscribe for more historical ballers told like you've never heard before. Comment below, should we roast the Rothschilds next, or maybe the Medicis? I want to hear who you want to see get the Knox treatment. And smash that bell icon so you never miss a fortune flex. This is Knox signing off. Keep exploring, stay cheeky, and don't sell your soul for a copper mine unless you have a housing project to back you up. Peace.